When I married Emily, I thought we had it all figured out. We were young, in love, and ready to take on the world together. 11 years later, I found myself reflecting on those early days, trying to pinpoint where it all started to go wrong. At first glance, everything seemed fine. We had a routine, a decent house, no kids by choice, and we supported each other through life's ups and downs. But beneath the surface, cracks were beginning to show. It wasn't always like this. Emily and I had shared countless happy moments, from spontaneous road trips to late-night talks that lasted until sunrise. Yet over the past year, something felt different. She seemed distant, distracted, like her mind was somewhere else entirely. I chalked it up to the stress she was dealing with at work. Her boss was overbearing, and she often came home complaining about how Paul, her coworker, was the only one keeping her sane in the chaos. I trusted her, so I never questioned it. Looking back, the signs were there. Subtle, but there. A new passcode on her phone. More nights, working late. A shift in her demeanor when she spoke about Paul. Her tone softened. Her eyes lit up. At the time, I dismissed these observations, convincing myself that I was overthinking things. But deep down, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. The truth hit me like a brick wall, out of nowhere, on an otherwise ordinary Wednesday night. Emily had been working late again, and I was at home scrolling through TV channels, half watching a documentary, trying to ignore the nagging pit in my stomach. It was a feeling I couldn't explain, a mix of unease and suspicion that had been growing stronger over the last few weeks. I wasn't the kind of person to snoop, but when her phone buzzed on the kitchen counter while she was in the shower, I froze. It wasn't the notification itself that drew my attention. It was the name, Paul. That name again. My heart sank, and before I could talk myself out of it, I picked up the phone and swiped to read the message. What I saw made my stomach churn. A simple line. Last night was incredible. Can't stop thinking about you. The air seemed to thicken around me as I scrolled further up the thread. There was no ambiguity, no room for doubt. Flirty exchanges, plans for secret dinners. Even a few photos I wish I could unsee. My hands shook, and my mind raced to process what I was looking at. Emily was having an affair. It felt surreal, like watching someone else's life fall apart in a soap opera. For a moment, I thought maybe there was some explanation, something innocent the first wasn't seeing. But the more I read, the harder it was to deny the reality staring me in the face. I didn't confront her that night. I couldn't. I just sat there in the dark, phone in hand, replaying every moment of the last year in my mind, trying to figure out when I had lost her. The confrontation happened the next evening. I didn't plan it, but after a sleepless night and an entire day of rehearsing what I might say, I couldn't hold it in any longer. Emily came home, looking tired but cheerful, and kissed me on the cheek like nothing was wrong. The casualness of her greeting nearly broke me. "Emily," I said, my voice tight. "We need to talk." She froze for a moment, her keys still in her hand. "What's wrong?" she asked, her tone cautious. I took a deep breath, trying to steady myself. "I saw the messages. Between you and Paul." Her face went pale, and for a moment, I thought she might faint. The mask she'd been wearing for God knows how long slipped away entirely. "What messages?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper, though we both knew she wasn't really asking. "Don't do that." I snapped, my frustration boiling over. "Don't pretend like you don't know what I'm talking about." "I know, Emily. I know about the affair." She opened her mouth to say something, but no words came out. Instead, she sank into the nearest chair, burying her face in her hands. After a long silence, she finally spoke, her voice muffled. "It wasn't supposed to happen," she said. "I never meant for it to go this far." I stood there, waiting for an explanation, an apology, something to make sense of the chaos swirling in my head. But all she could say was, "It just happened." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "It just happened?" I repeated, my voice rising. "You don't accidentally fall into someone's arms, Emily. You made a choice. Over and over again." She looked up at me, tears streaming down her face. "I was lonely," she said. "You've been so distant, and Paul, he was there. He listened. He cared. I didn't mean to hurt you, I swear." Her words stung, but not because they were true. They stung because they were excuses, and I wasn't in the mood to entertain them. You could have told me you were unhappy, I said, my voice breaking. We could have worked on it, but instead, you betrayed me. You threw away everything we built together. She tried to reach for my hand, but I pulled away. I didn't want to hurt you, she said again, as if that made any of this better. Well, congratulations, I said bitterly. Because you did. After Emily's tearful confession, I felt like I'd been hollowed out from the inside. Anger, hurt, disbelief, it all churned together, threatening to consume me. I wanted to scream, cry, throw something, anything to release the tidal wave of emotions crashing over me. But instead, I just sat there in silence, staring at her, feeling like a stranger in my own home. When she finally left the room to give me space, I collapsed onto the couch, head in my hands. 11 years. 11 years of love, trust, and memories shattered in an instant. The life we had built together suddenly felt like a lie, every happy moment now tainted by the knowledge of her betrayal. That night, I couldn't sleep. I couldn't even lie in the same bed we had shared for so many years. The thought of her, of Paul, of the messages I'd read, it was too much. I ended up pacing the living room until dawn, running every scenario through my head. What had I done wrong? How had I not seen this coming? Was there something I could have done to stop it? The worst part was the sense of humiliation. I couldn't stop imagining how Paul must have laughed behind my back, knowing he had crossed a line I never saw coming. I hated him. I hated her. And I hated myself for not noticing sooner. The anger came in waves, but it always gave way to sadness. I couldn't bring myself to cry, even though I wanted to. It was like my body had shut down, refusing to process what had happened. Instead, I felt numb, detached, like I was watching someone else's life fall apart. The next day, I called in sick to work. I couldn't face the world. Not yet. I needed time to sort through the mess in my head, to figure out what I was supposed to do next. All I knew was that I couldn't stay in limbo. Something had to change. By the third day, I realized I couldn't keep drifting in the fog of disbelief and pain. I had to make a decision, one way or another. Staying in this limbo, reeling from her betrayal, was tearing me apart. The house felt suffocating, every corner filled with reminders of the life Emily and I had built together, and the trust she had broken. I spent hours weighing my options. Could we fix this? Could I ever look at her the same way again? Even if she swore it was over with Paul, would I ever truly believe her? The answer hit me like a cold slap in the face. No, I couldn't. The Emily I thought I knew, the one I had vowed to spend my life with, no longer existed. She had been replaced by someone I didn't recognize, someone capable of looking me in the eye and lying to my face. As much as it hurt to admit, there was no coming back from this. That evening, I called a divorce lawyer. The words felt foreign in my mouth, like they belonged to someone else. But with every step, I felt a sense of clarity begin to form. This wasn't what I wanted, but it was what I needed. When Emily came home that night, I was waiting for her. She looked hesitant, maybe even hopeful, as if she thought I might forgive her. But as soon as I handed her the envelope, the lawyer's contact information, a list of her belongings she needed to pack, the hope drained from her face. "This is it, Emily," I said, my voice firm despite the lump in my throat. "I can't do this anymore." She started to cry, pleading with me to reconsider. She promised it was a mistake, that she would end things with Paul, that we could go to therapy and fix this. But I stood my ground. "You already made your choice," I said. "Now, I'm making mine." It wasn't easy. Watching her break down in front of me, hearing her beg for another chance, tore at my resolve. But I knew that if I stayed, I'd be sacrificing my self-respect, my peace of mind, and any chance of true happiness. This was the beginning of the end, and though it hurt like hell, I felt a strange sense of relief. I was finally taking control of my life again. The days after that conversation were some of the hardest of my life. Emily moved out within the week, taking only the essentials at first: clothes, toiletries, and her laptop. I told her she could come back later to pack the rest of her things, but I couldn't handle seeing her for too long. It was unbearable, the sight of her packing up pieces of our life like they were just items on a checklist. The house felt eerily quiet once she was gone. I had always thought of it as our home, a place we had filled with laughter and love, but now it felt cold, empty, and unfamiliar. Her absence was like a wound that wouldn't stop bleeding, visible in the half-empty closet, the missing mug from the kitchen, the indentation on her side of the bed. For a while, I avoided the places we used to go together. The park where we'd walk on Sundays, the coffee shop down the street, even the local grocery store where we had countless debates over what to cook for dinner. Everything felt tainted, as if the memories we'd made there were now mocking me. The hardest part was explaining it to people. Friends and family started to notice something was off when I turned down invitations or avoided their calls. I wasn't ready to tell the whole story yet, so I kept it vague. We're going through some things, I'd say, hoping they wouldn't press for details. But eventually, I had to tell my parents, and that conversation was brutal. My mom, bless her, was furious on my behalf. "How could she do this to you?" she demanded, her voice trembling with anger. My dad, ever the pragmatist, simply said, "You're doing the right thing. Don't let her drag you down any further." Hearing their support was comforting, but it also made everything feel more real. This wasn't just a bad dream I could wake up from. It was my reality now. I started focusing on the practical side of the separation, canceling joint accounts, dividing up bills, and meeting with my lawyer to finalize the paperwork. Each step felt like closing another chapter of our shared life, and while it was painful, it was also strangely freeing. For the first time in weeks, I began to feel like I might survive this. With Emily gone, I was left alone to confront the aftermath. The house, once filled with the rhythms of our shared life, now seemed to echo with reminders of her absence. Every corner of it held memories, some beautiful, others now bitterly painful. The framed photos on the walls felt like they belonged to another life. A picture of us laughing at a beach bonfire, a snapshot from our first trip to the mountains, and one of her wrapping her arms around me during our anniversary dinner. I couldn't bear to look at them anymore. One night, fueled by a mix of anger and sadness, I took them all down and shoved them into a box. Clearing those pictures was cathartic, but it didn't erase the memories themselves. They still lurked in the smallest, most unexpected places. Her favorite coffee mug, the faint scent of her perfume on the couch, even the playlists we had built together over the years. They all carried the weight of what was lost. I avoided the bedroom for as long as I could. Sleeping on the couch became my new normal, but eventually, I knew I had to reclaim that space. The first night back in that bed was brutal. I laid there, staring at the ceiling, unable to stop my mind from wandering to all the nights we'd shared in that same room. But as the days passed, the sharpness of the memories began to dull, and the space slowly started to feel like mine again. One unexpected moment of clarity came when I found an old journal of mine buried in a drawer. I used to write in it sporadically, jotting down thoughts and reflections during major life moments. As I flipped through the pages, I found an entry from years ago, one I had written during a rough patch in our marriage. In it, I had described feeling unappreciated, unheard, and unsure of how to bridge the gap growing between us. The words hit me hard, not because I regretted writing them, but because they reminded me that the cracks in our relationship had been there long before the affair. It didn't justify what Emily had done, but it helped me start to let go of the idea that everything had been perfect until she ruined it. That night, for the first time in weeks, I felt a flicker of something I hadn't felt in a long time. Hope. Hope that I could move forward, that I could find peace, and that maybe, just maybe, this wasn't the end of my story. A few days after Emily moved out, I made the difficult decision to contact her parents. They had always been kind to me, and I felt they deserved to know what had happened. It wasn't an act of vengeance. I wasn't looking to humiliate her, but I also wasn't going to let her control the narrative. Her mother answered the phone, her voice warm and cheerful. "How are you, dear?" she asked, completely unaware of the storm brewing. I hesitated for a moment, unsure how to start, but finally said, "I think we need to talk. There's something you should know about Emily and me." The words poured out of me. How I discovered the affair, how Emily admitted to it, and how I decided to end the marriage. Her mother was silent for a long time, and I could almost hear her piecing it together in her mind. When she finally spoke, Her voice was heavy with disappointment. I don't know what to say, she admitted. I had no idea things were this bad between you two. I'm so sorry, Jacob. Hearing her apology made me choke up, but I pushed through. I just thought you should hear it from me, I said. I didn't want there to be any misunderstandings. Her father called me later that evening. Unlike her mother, he didn't mince words. I'm angry with her, he said bluntly. She threw away a good man and a good life. You didn't deserve this. His words meant more to me than I could express. It was a strange comfort to know that even her own family couldn't justify what she had done. As for Emily, I knew she wasn't thrilled that I had told her parents. She called me a few days later, her voice tinged with anger and embarrassment. You didn't have to involve them, she said. I didn't do this to hurt you, I replied, keeping my tone calm. But they deserve to know the truth. You can't just pretend this didn't happen. She sighed, frustrated, but didn't argue further. I hung up feeling a strange mix of emotions, relief, vindication, and sadness. The ties between us were unraveling faster than I had anticipated, and while it was painful, it also felt necessary. Involving her family didn't fix anything, but it was another step toward reclaiming my life. I wasn't looking for validation, but their support reminded me that I wasn't alone in this. I had avoided thinking too much about Paul, but as the days passed, my anger toward him simmered just beneath the surface. He wasn't just a name in Emily's messages anymore. He was a real person who had played a direct role in destroying my marriage. I wasn't sure if confronting him was a good idea, but I couldn't let it go. I needed answers, or maybe I just needed to vent my anger. Either way, I found myself outside his office one afternoon, waiting for him to leave work. When he finally appeared, laughing with a few coworkers, I felt my blood boil. He looked so casual, so unaffected, as if nothing had happened. I waited until he was alone, walking to his car, before I stepped into his path. Paul, I said, my voice steady but cold. He turned, surprised to see me. For a moment, he looked like a deer caught in headlights. Jacob, he said, clearly uncomfortable. I wasn't expecting to see you. Yeah, I bet you weren't, I replied. But here I am. You've got a minute. He glanced around nervously, probably hoping someone would intervene, but no one did. Look, he started, I'm sorry about what happened. I never meant for things to get so complicated. I laughed bitterly. Complicated? That's what you're calling it? You had an affair with my wife, and now my life is in shambles. That's not complicated, Paul. That's destructive. He had the decency to look ashamed, but his apology felt hollow. I know it was wrong, he said, and I'm sorry. But Emily and it wasn't supposed to be like this. I stepped closer, my anger bubbling over. You don't get to play the victim here, I snapped. You knew she was married. You knew what you were doing, and you did it anyway. So spare me the excuses. He nodded, swallowing hard. You're right, he admitted. I have no excuse. I messed up. I never should have let it happen. For a brief moment, I felt a flicker of satisfaction seeing him squirm. But it wasn't enough to erase what he'd done. You didn't just hurt me, I said. You ruined her too. And for what? A fling? A couple of months of excitement. He didn't answer, and I didn't wait for him to. Stay away from me, I said, my voice firm. And stay away from her. You've done enough damage. As I walked away, I felt a strange sense of closure. The confrontation hadn't fixed anything, but it gave me the release I needed. Paul wasn't worth any more of my energy, and for the first time, I felt ready to leave him in the past where he belonged. In the weeks following my confrontation with Paul, Emily made several attempts to reach out. At first, her messages were short and apologetic, but as I continued to keep my distance, they grew more desperate. One evening, she showed up at the house unannounced. I opened the door to find her standing there, her eyes red and puffy, clutching a folder. Jacob, she said softly, can we please talk? I wanted to slam the door in her face, but something in her expression stopped me. Against my better judgment, I let her in. She sat on the edge of the couch, looking like she didn't belong there anymore. I brought these, she said, sliding the folder across the coffee table. Inside were printouts of couples counseling sessions, book recommendations, and handwritten notes about how she wanted to rebuild our marriage. I know I messed up, she began, her voice trembling. But I want to fix this. I'm willing to do whatever it takes. Her words hit me like a wave. There was a time when hearing her say those things would have given me hope. But now, it just felt hollow. I can't do this, Emily, I said, trying to keep my tone calm but firm. It's too late. You made your choice. She reached for my hand, but I pulled back. It wasn't a choice, she argued. I was confused, and I let myself get carried away. But I never stopped loving you. That's why I'm here, because I love you, Jacob. I shook my head, the bitterness rising in my chest. If you loved me, you wouldn't have done this. You wouldn't have betrayed me, lied to me, and destroyed everything we built together. Her tears came fast then, and she tried again to plead her case. People make mistakes, she said, her voice breaking. But we've been through so much together. Doesn't that mean anything to you? It does, I said, my own voice thick with emotion. But it's not enough. You broke something that can't be fixed. I can't spend the rest of my life wondering if I can trust you again. She sat there for a moment, silent, before finally nodding. I understand, she whispered, her tears falling freely now. I just wanted to try. As she left that night, I felt a strange mix of emotions. There was no joy in rejecting her, no satisfaction in watching her walk away. But there was also no doubt in my mind that I had made the right decision. The day I filed for divorce felt both monumental and devastating. It wasn't a decision I had made lightly, but after everything that had happened, it was the only option that made sense. Emily's betrayal had shattered something inside me, something that no amount of counseling or apologies could repair. Walking into the lawyer's office was surreal. I sat across from a calm, professional woman who outlined the process step by step. It all sounded so clinical, so impersonal, like we were discussing the dissolution of a business contract instead of the end of an 11-year marriage. Do you have any joint assets? She asked, her tone businesslike. A house, a couple of bank accounts, I replied, my voice devoid of emotion. I hadn't thought much about the logistics of splitting our life in two. I was too consumed by the emotional wreckage to focus on the practicalities. As we went through the paperwork, I couldn't help but feel the weight of finality pressing down on me. This was it, the end of everything we had built together. No more us. No more future plans. No more hoping things could somehow go back to the way they were. The lawyer asked if I wanted to pursue any claims against Emily for infidelity, but I declined. As much as I wanted to punish her for what she had done, I knew dragging it out would only prolong my own suffering. I just wanted it to be over. When I handed over my signature, a strange calm washed over me. It wasn't happiness or relief, but it was a step toward closure. I had done everything I could to save my marriage, but in the end, I couldn't save something that Emily had chosen to destroy. Later that evening, I sent her a brief message to let her know the papers had been filed. Her response came quickly. I understand. I'm sorry for everything. It wasn't the dramatic reaction I had expected, but maybe that was for the best. There were no more fights left to have, no more explanations to give. We were done. As I sat alone in the house that night, I realized that this was the first step toward reclaiming my life. It wouldn't be easy, and the pain wouldn't go away overnight, but at least I was moving forward. In the weeks following the divorce filing, I started hearing bits and pieces about Emily's life through mutual friends and occasionally her mother, who would still check in on me from time to time. Emily had moved back in with her parents, a fact that surprised me at first, but in hindsight made sense. Apparently, things with Paul hadn't worked out. He had no intention of leaving his wife, and whatever fleeting connection, they had fizzled out the moment it became real. Emily had gambled everything on him, and now she was left with nothing. She's not doing well, her mom told me over the phone one evening. She's looking for a new job, but it's been tough. I know you probably don't want to hear this, but she regrets everything. I didn't say much in response. What could I say? I wasn't happy to hear about her struggles, but I wasn't exactly sympathetic either. She had made her choices, and now she was living with the consequences. Mutual friends tried to tiptoe around the subject whenever Emily's name came up, but it wasn't hard to piece together the picture. She was isolated, embarrassed, and struggling to rebuild her life. Part of me felt sorry for her, but another part one I wasn't proud of, felt vindicated. She had caused so much pain, and now she was feeling it herself. What struck me the most was how quickly Paul had disappeared from the narrative. The man she had thrown everything away for hadn't even stuck around. It was a harsh reminder of how fleeting and hollow her affair had been. I wondered if she ever thought about what she had lost. Not just the marriage, but the trust, the partnership, and the future we had planned together. Maybe she did, or maybe she was too focused on picking up the pieces of her own life to reflect on it. Either way, I didn't let myself dwell on it for long. Her struggles were no longer my responsibility. My life wasn't tied to hers anymore, and while it felt strange to let go of that connection, it also felt liberating. For the first time in years, I could focus on myself, on what I wanted, and on what I needed to move forward. After the initial chaos settled, I found myself faced with a question I hadn't considered in a long time. Who am I without Emily? For 11 years, my identity had been so tightly intertwined with our marriage that I had almost forgotten what it was like to just be me. The first step in reclaiming my life was creating a space that felt like my own. I started with the house. I sold the bed we had shared, replaced the couch, and rearranged the furniture in the living room. It wasn't just about changing the look. It was about breaking free from the memories that haunted every corner. I even took on a few DIY projects, something I'd always wanted to try but never made time for. Repainting the kitchen cabinets, hanging new shelves, planting a small garden in the backyard. It all felt oddly therapeutic, as if each small improvement to the house mirrored the healing I was trying to do inside myself. Another big change was getting back into old hobbies. I dusted off my guitar, something I hadn't touched in years, and started playing again. At first, it felt strange, like I was trying too hard to distract myself. But as the weeks went by, I found genuine joy in it. Music became an outlet for all the emotions I couldn't quite put into words. Socially, I began reconnecting with friends. It was awkward at first, explaining why Emily wasn't around anymore. Most of them already knew the gist of what had happened, but there were still awkward silences when her name came up. Over time, though, those silences disappeared, replaced by laughter and conversations about anything and everything else. One of the biggest surprises was how much support I found in unexpected places. A coworker I wasn't particularly close with invited me to join a running group, and while I'd never been much of a runner, I decided to give it a shot. It was tough at first, but the camaraderie and the physical challenge gave me something new to focus on. As I started to fill my life with these small victories, new routines, new hobbies, and new connections, I began to realize something important. Emily's betrayal had broken me, yes, but it hadn't destroyed me. I was still here, still standing, and for the first time in a long time, I felt a spark of hope for the future. I wasn't fully healed, not yet. There were still moments when the memories crept back in, uninvited and unwelcome. But with each passing day, they felt less sharp, less overwhelming. Slowly but surely, I was reclaiming myself, and it felt good. As the months passed, the pain began to dull, replaced by a sense of clarity I hadn't expected. I realized that my life wasn't over. It was just changing. I had been so wrapped up in the betrayal, in the heartbreak, that I hadn't noticed the opportunities opening up before me. I started to focus on my career in a way I never had before. Work became more than just a job. It became a space where I could prove to myself that I was capable, resilient, and worthy of success. I took on new projects, stepped out of my comfort zone, and even earned a promotion. It wasn't about filling the void Emily had left. It was about building something meaningful for myself. Socially, I began to expand my horizons. The running group I had joined became more than just an activity. It turned into a community. Through them, I discovered other events, hiking trips, trivia nights, even a local charity drive. These small, shared experiences reminded me that life wasn't just about the past. There were still so many moments worth living for, so many people worth meeting. Every now and then I thought about dating again. Friends encouraged me to put myself out there, but I wasn't in any rush. I needed to fully heal before I could even consider opening up to someone new. For now, I was content focusing on myself, on rebuilding a life I could be proud of. There were still moments of grief. Quiet evenings when the house felt too still, or when an old song on the radio brought back memories of Emily. But those moments no longer consumed me. They became a part of the larger picture, a reminder of where I had been and how far I had come. One night, as I was journaling, a habit I had picked up again in the wake of everything, I wrote down something that surprised me. This was never about losing Emily. It was about finding myself. It wasn't that the pain or betrayal had disappeared. It was still there, buried deep, but it no longer defined me. I had survived it. I had grown from it. And while I couldn't say I was grateful for what had happened, I could say this: I was stronger because of it. Looking back now, with some distance between me and everything that happened, I've come to understand that life doesn't always follow the plans we make. Sometimes it falls apart in ways we can't predict, but that doesn't mean it's the end. It just means we have to find a new beginning. The experience taught me more about myself than I ever thought possible. I learned that I'm stronger than I gave myself credit for, that I can weather heartbreak and betrayal and still come out on the other side. I learned that love, no matter how strong, isn't enough if trust and respect aren't there to hold it up. I also realized the importance of paying attention, not just to your partner, but to yourself. In hindsight, there were warning signs in my marriage, moments when we stopped communicating, stopped connecting, and started drifting apart. I ignored them because I didn't want to face the uncomfortable truth that things weren't as perfect as I wanted to believe. But the most important lesson? Forgiveness. Not for Emily, but for myself. For the mistakes I made, for the things I didn't see, for the times I stayed silent when I should have spoken up. Letting go of the anger and guilt was the only way I could truly move forward. If there's one thing I would say to someone going through what I did, it's this: you are not defined by the worst thing that happens to you. You are defined by how you respond to it, by how you choose to rebuild and grow. Pain is inevitable, but so is healing. As for Emily, I've let go of the bitterness. I don't know what her life looks like now, and honestly, I don't need to. I've stopped carrying her choices as a burden on my own shoulders. My focus is on the future, on creating a life that's full, meaningful, and entirely my own. For the first time in years, I feel at peace. I don't know what lies ahead, but I know I'll face it with open eyes, an open heart, and the confidence that no matter what happens, I'll be okay.